Good afternoon and welcome to all. Thank you for joining today's webinar on automation of cybersecurity. My name is Prasanna Kumar. I'm the Journal Head for Sales, South India, Sri Lanka and Maldives. We are delighted to have you with us today to participate in this webinar, which will highlight about current threats, anatomy of cyber attack, and options available to customers to deal with current situations. Now it's time for next generation security, which is key to stop cyber attacks and how Sophos helps customers manage their networks with advanced solutions. We have Mr. Malay, our next speaker, who is going to talk about current threats, chain of attacks, Sophos solutions, followed by panel discussion. So we are going to have a live session on customers who are using Sophos, and some actually are sharing their experience on general topics, how to deal with cybersecurity. And during the session, you can actually post your questions in Q&A box, and we will address it during the webinar. So the next speaker, Malay, is going to take over, and he will walk through the current situation and Sophos solutions. Malay, over to you.
Thank you very much, Prasanna. Very warm welcome to all the participants here. I'll begin with the topic, which is automate your cybersecurity. While much has been talked about cybersecurity and threat landscape, as we know that the threats are getting more and more sophisticated in nature and are on rise than ever before, there's a strong need to automate the defense mechanism. My name is Malay Upadhyay, and I work into sales engineering at Sophos. So for next few minutes, I'm going to talk about how we can automate your cybersecurity. Before we dive into today's session, it's important to acknowledge why we are here. The reality is that most organizations have a 1 in 2 chance of falling victim to a major cyber attack. We recently commissioned an independent vendor agnostic survey for about 5,000 IT managers across 26 countries, which revealed that a staggering 51% of respondents had been hit by ransomware in the last year. And furthermore, out of 51%, 73% of these cases where criminals succeeded into encrypting the data. So knowing how to respond is the key. If the attacker do get you, the essential thing is to minimize the impact of such an attack. The rise of cyber attack targeting the data and critical infrastructure of nation is undeniable, with no sign of slowing down. From state-sponsored hackers to hacktivists to criminal enterprises, groups are leveraging the power of automation to deploy malware with great speed and scale. Given the automated nature of many of these attacks, traditional manual approach to defense are clearly no longer enough. However, there are ways organizations can protect critical information and infrastructure by automating the cybersecurity response. Let's step back a bit and understand the kill chain process. An attacker can infiltrate an organization in a number of ways, by gaining remote access to a system on the network, by using a compromised website to exploit a browser vulnerability and install some payload, by using a phishing email or an attachment, or through office documents loaded with malware, or by leaving a USB stick where someone might find it and plug it into their system. Once into the network, if not the hacker themselves that got the access, the malware will call home to let the hacker know that it's successful and wait for the hacker to do something with it. It may then spread on its own if that's what it is designed to do so, either exploiting vulnerability across the network or using credential theft. Then it can do one of the few things that benefits the hacker. It can steal data, credentials, banking information, or start using resources on the network to mine cryptocurrency. It can become a bot and participate in attacking other organizations. And it can encrypt files or block access to system in exchange for ransom. A security solution must protect the network on several ways by using different defense approach. That's what we call it as defense in depth. For an example, blocking the attack from entering the network either by having an IPS or firewall, web security, email security, or using a sandboxing, preventing malware from calling home by using ATP or web filtering protection, preventing spreading across the network from one node to another node, which basically what we call as a lateral movement, using isolation by isolating the machines and stuff. Now, as you see that there's much needed to be done by the IT team to keep improving the security posture. There are so many security solutions involved here when we talk about the layered approach, which is quite essential. But on the other side, the IT team, they are really struggling to make all this instrument, all these network components to play smoothly. Perhaps it's the time for us to move from an individual security product such as endpoint, firewall, email, etc., working on their own, to a cybersecurity as a system where the product works together. I think a point product as an island, each one can be very good on their own, but they work in isolation. There is no sharing of information whatsoever between the product. Each one has its own management console that adds an overhead for the administrator to manage, jump on different consoles for configuration or taking an action to an incident. They are built separately from a different engineering team, so you have to manually make them all play nicely together. And while point security products are like an island, cybersecurity as a system is like a team. The product actively works together using the combined capability to stop the threat. It shares the information in real time. They can be managed from a single centralized console. Plus, because they all are engineered from start to work together, they are compatible with each other by design. So where are we heading? So Zero Trust Synchronized Security creates an autonomous system that understands the environment on which it is operating in order to analyze that environment and make it better and faster decisions than a human can make. Built a dynamic security policy based on threat detection, user behavior, traffic analysis, and compliance guidelines, and automate device containment and restore by sharing security intelligence between the security products. With Sophos, all security solutions are tightly integrated and are designed to share security intelligence between each other to automate the response through a single management console. What you can see in the center of the screen is Sophos Central. Synchronized security is a technique that enables sharing the security intel between the solutions using security hardware. So the machine ideally would continuously share the heartbeat status, whether it's good or bad. The endpoint triggers the change in health status if the endpoint detects malicious traffic, or there is an attempt to call home, or the ATP engine is generating an alert, or the endpoint itself identifies a threat. So if there is any kind of change, if the endpoint detects that there is some malicious traffic or malicious process has been running, it would trigger a red signal. It will signal it back to the firewall, and firewall will then isolate that computer from the network. On the other hand, the firewall triggers the change in the health status of the endpoint. So the firewall, when it sees the IPS traffic being generated, the traffic which is generated from the endpoint, which generates an alert under the IPS, the firewall will trigger the change of the status of the endpoint, and it will then inform all the computers, whether they are in the single broadcast domain or they are in a different segment. It will inform all other nodes within the organization to telling them that please put a shield in front of you and please do not communicate with the bad computer in place. And this is all happens automatically. Now what happens next? While Sophos endpoints quarantines itself, it goes into a self-isolation mode as well, and is in process of neutralizing the threat. So the endpoint security Sophos endpoint, which is sitting on the computer, will initiate neutralizing the threat. In the meantime, it also informs the firewall about its current bad health, so that firewall can dynamically create policies to block the network traffic which is destined to and from for this particular bad host. Now, once Sophos endpoint cleans up the malware, it would again trigger back to the firewall about the change in health status. So once the endpoint is claimed by Sophos by the Sophos NextGen endpoint, it will inform to the firewall about its change. Now it's in a good health status. So firewall will restore all the connection that the computer had before. neutralizing, quarantining, isolation, and automatically restoring. Everything happens automatically. And this functionality would work not only for the machines and servers in different networks and segment, as I mentioned, but it also works for the nodes that are residing in the same broadcast domain. So you must be wondering, like, how much time does it take to, from isolation, then neutralization, and restoring the access of the machine or the computer in the network. So what typically on an average takes about 3 hours to respond to an incident, with Sophos, where cybersecurity works as a system, it automates it in just 8 seconds. I'd like to pause here and tell you about one of the real world example, which I was working with one of the customer. So in one of the company, a person was working in an IT department, was on a planned leave, and was going back to his home city, hometown, along with his family to attend a wedding. While he was at the airport, he received a call from his company that the server were being breached, and this person had to stay back to address the problem and restore the things and investigate what has happened. So it nearly took him like several days to get the things back to normal before he could join his family back home. This customer eventually, which is now a Sophos customer, is quite relaxed being, having Sophos endpoint and firewall in place, because all the security components are tightly integrated. They talk with each other, they share the security intelligence, and the things are done automatically, whether it's your week off, whether you are on leave, if it's weekend, or whatever it would be. So that's what that's what is the strength about having synchronized security in place. So not just about endpoint and the firewall, just like the endpoint security as well, like wireless and mobile also share security intel. So for example, if a mobile user does something which is classified as a compliance violation and which has the action deny network set in mobile, a red heartbeat status will be sent to the wireless, and wireless would then restrict Wi-Fi access to selected sites or domains only. This is also called as wall guard. So the mobile users are notified with a splash screen that the device has been quarantined because of so and so reason and has been restricted to access certain websites. Along with that, we have extended synchronized security with our email security and Fistrat. Fistrat is a simulation tool which basically you can act as a bad guy for your organization, create a sample, spam email, phishing email rather, where you can, educate your employees, educate your users who are working for the organization, and develop a clicking culture for the users so they are aware and alert. They are quite vigilant when they access any kind of email or the attachment. So what happens here is that when an email security, when a user receives an email after having all spam check, SFP, DKIM, and all scanning has been done, and when the email is landed in the inbox of the user, which has a link, and when the user clicks on that link, although the email security would identify whether that link is malicious or the file is malicious as such, or if at all it violates any other security policies. So if at all it does, then the email security would inform to the Fistrat, and the automated training material would be sent across to the user, where the user would be educated, that what mistake has it done, and it would be a learning for the user as well, as I mentioned, that what kind of clicking culture the user has to develop within the organization to maintain the compliance. Now, why Sophos? So Sophos provides the most comprehensive cloud platform to manage multiple security solutions from a single management console, which is Sophos Central. And most importantly, these security components work as a cybersecurity system, as we discussed earlier, allowing the administrator not only with the ease of deployment, but also with the ease of management, because you have a single management console. You can manage your firewall, you can manage access points, you can manage your endpoint security, mobile, server encryption, etc. These are certain achievements which you can see where Sophos ratings stand tall among all other competitors that we have in the industry. And not just the third-party report, many global customers across the globe trust us to secure their organization from advanced threats. So that's it from my end. Thank you very much for listening to me. Wish you have a wonderful day ahead. I'll hand it over to my colleague here to take it forward. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, we can address them now.
Thank you, Mr. Malay, for such a comprehensive and exhaustive presentation on cybersecurity in EDR. Comprehensive because that is pretty symbolic of the Sophos endpoint solutions that we are offering. Since today it's all about uncovering how important is endpoint protection and why should you consider one. I know at the beginning of the webinar, for a person just finding out about EDR, this may all have sounded Greek and Latin. There would be questions if this is the right fit for my company. How can an all-in-one solution add so much protection against ransomware and malware on my network? But you have done a fantastic job in breaking down the kernel of the discussion very nicely. Before that, let me just introduce myself. I am Prasad Patkar. I'm the editor with SMEVenture, and I'll take you to the next half of the discussion. But before that, let me do a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions, please use the chat box option on the app, and we will try our best. In fact, we'll answer them right away. Now, let's move on to the second half of the webinar. I would now like to welcome our speakers for today. We have with us Mr. Manga Sridhar, Program Manager, ILM Cybersecurity, Yash Technologies. And we have Mr. Gilbert Doss, Senior IT Security Analyst, Cortesian. We are so glad to have you, Mr. Sridhar and Doss. Glad to have you here to share your acumen.
Hello. Thanks, Prasad.
Okay, so let's have a discussion. Let me just get to each one of you. Mr. Sridhar, now as we know that 2020 has acted as an inflection point, not just in terms of cybersecurity or tech, we're talking about life in general. Let me know what are the top cybersecurity trends for 2021 according to you?
Sure. So basically, if you look at the pandemic situations that we all came through, right? During the pandemic, it was all of a sudden state of emergency for everyone to put their resources working remotely. So the entire workforce has been on remote. The security challenges for most of the organizations were like unprepared. That no one was expecting their entire workforce to be on a remote scenarios. So this made the entire organizations to focus more on the secure business continuity and then how much you can put your trust with your employees, with your business data that's floating around when a number of stakeholders work on across the geolocations in specific. So having said that, so when the offices were basically opening, they were trying to adopt a normal approach where you had a minimum set of controls within a trusted domain network boundaries. So you have everyone connected to your corporate domain networks and you keep on doing. All of a sudden, when you are out of your infrastructure, your devices are open to individual internet access, right? I can plug into my open internet access. So how much of my controls are really able to defend when I'm outside my organizational trusted network boundaries? So if you look at the whole the horizon where the requirements are coming up, zero trust environment was something that was extremely critical for every organization. And then organizations started looking at towards a cyber resilient ecosystem where you have your secure businesses, you have your data secured, especially if you're working for larger scale customers like federal governments, the defense customers where data is extremely critical. So migration, so organizations that had their services on cloud were more kind of less stressful compared to the ones who have their physical data centers, where you have to have data being, again, additional controls to be taken place, who is accessing data and all that. So we expect organizations to start working on a zero trust security model, which we ourselves have adopted on this. And this will basically help create a kind of a secure environment where security has now become a priority from end to end across the stack, whether it's people, process, data, services, technology. It's like a single thread of security spanning end to end across these all layers of the stack. And we also expect business to focus on more on time doing more of their own assessments, which was more important. Especially, you need to do plenty of assessments on your own environment, to ensure that you basically understand the maturity of your own organization more frequently than ever before. And like typically organizations that tend to conduct their VAPT, vulnerability assessment or pen testing, once in 3 months. Now they ended up doing every month, depending upon the complexity, depending upon their business use cases and scenarios as such. So overall, when we look at in terms of the trends, point number one, remote workforce is extremely critical, where you have your data outside your network. You having a mandatory VPN connection, multi-factor authentication is extremely critical, and that to an app-based multi-factor authentication, you need to have constant reviews of your access. Access reviews must be mandatorily performed. So there are 3 strong pillars which we believe as part of the trends: effective policy governance, effective data governance, and effective access governance. If these 3 can be articulated and well knitted as a triangle, that's where your entire zero trust model will be spanning between these 3 pillars. And that's what we as an organization have adopted. And that's where when now that you have the IoT landscape, where you have the devices, you have the cloud infrastructure, you have the physical data centers, and then you have other things coming up, and then on top of which you have new technologies that are coming up, right? So there should be a connect between each and every element. All dots must be connected in order to safeguard an infrastructure. So trending, remote workforce is number 1. Cloud adoption has to be more important when it comes to your data security, data from a resilience perspective, business continuity. Then you need to have rigorous training for all your employees. And that is the biggest gap that we all have seen that. Now it has becoming a mandatory training for enforced on all employees more frequently than ever before. And then you have to have a strong incident response. The biggest trending right now is organizations are now moving towards having an effective incident response, which was earlier not so important, but now mandatory monitoring, mandatory incident response is another layer that every organization has been currently trending on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sridhar. You have given a very multifactorial explanation about the trends. Mr. Das, coming to you, can you hear me?
Yes, Prasad, I can hear you well.
Yes, Mr. Das. Now Mr. Malay explained about the different types of cyber attacks. We are talking about direct, indirect, tangible, and the intangible ones. What are the costs? I want to know.
Okay, so yeah, so as you were saying, there are like multiple costs involved to any breach that can be like direct and indirect. So while talking about the basics, let's say a particular infrastructure is being compromised. So the first thing is the users cannot access the system, and even if they are accessing it, which is compromised, it's going to increase the vulnerability. They're going to spread that again to multiple systems. So there we need to get the catch. So the first thing is the loss of productivity, and we have to mitigate the spread as well. So that would be the first cost which any organization would have to pay. And second one is the loss of client data. In our organization, it's all about we having other companies' data and we processing that. So that would be the second thing. So, and let's say if any data is compensated or the breached, we have to compensate the client. So that is one huge thing. And the third one would be the paying the ransomware, if it is a ransomware attack. So these would be some of the direct expenses if we come across any type of breaches. And indirect, obviously, the loss of trust and the brand quality of the company would completely go away. So these are the multiple the expenses, I would say, if at all any attack comes in.
Okay, thanks. I think you have pretty nicely explained the different types of tangible as well as intangible costs and expenses that we have. Mr. Sridhar, let me come back to you again. How has cybersecurity changed the landscape? I'm specifically talking about your organization.
Yeah, specifically, the 2 focus areas was on digital transformations and the cloud adoption that has took a rapid pace in the last year or so. What we already had, now we have done some rigorous transformations on that part. Most of our security controls have gone a massive revamp compared to what we earlier had. But luckily, we initiated this in even before the pandemic, couple of quarters earlier we started this, but somehow that has been very fruitful for us, especially from an endpoint protection where all our users have been working remotely. So we adopted again from a Sophos EDR platform perspective, from an endpoint threat protection in real time. That's one of the advantages we had from all our EUC devices, all our servers. They all are running on the technology platform which we trusted more. We had our network transformations with the DNS layer security, which is another added advantage out of it. All our we took all the basic fundamentals, especially where we hardened all our infrastructure assets using the CIS level 1 standards, rigorous CS level scans, VA scans we have been performed. Now pen testing earlier it was annually once, now we do every quarter. So all controls are now been rigorously reviewed and all. We have a dedicated team now that continuously monitors. We have a security operations which continuously monitors across our globe, including our own enterprises, our affiliates and everything. So we have built a checklist for our remote workforce, the do's and don'ts. And every month we have bi-weekly training programs for all our employees. We conduct a 1 hour dedicated on the new trends that are happening within the industry today, the steps that we have taken and the steps that the user must take, the prevention kind of a thing. From our security operations, the IOCs versus the IOAs, the indicators of attack versus indicators of compromise. The entire SecOps team has been ramped up completely. We have now the effective incident responders. All our technology platforms are integrated into our centralized security operations, wherein we have 24/7 monitoring. So overall, the threat attackers have remained the same over the years, especially if we all look into the trends. It's the ransomware, the malware variants existed 10 years back, but over a period of time, they just revised themselves from an attack sophistication perspective. So 79% of the industry attacks are already known to the industry. They're nothing new. They keep changing. So if we can protect ourselves from these 79 to 80% of these threat attack vectors, right? If you can refer the Maitri attack framework or the cyber kill chain model, which we all do as a larger organization from a technology stack perspective also. The overall, what we are trying to come up and convey a message is, it's a strong homework alongside with your own technology platforms that you adapt. Leverage, it's not the automation that does completely, but it's your own understanding of your data. You need to understand the 3 principles which we talk about in our organization. Do you know your data? Do you understand the risks associated with your data? Do you understand the risk appetite of your organization? If you have these answers to these 3 questions, your technology platforms, your own policies, everything will be focusedly effective in acting on the threat attack vectors, rather than taking an industry generalization kind of a use cases, right? So overall, businesses, we all took an effective adoption of multiple technology platforms. So as of now, we are basically still continuing to improve our security posture, but we are well placed.
Thank you, Mr. Sridhar.
I answered that question.
Thank you. You spoke specifically about adopt and adapt. We
Yes.
talk about the Darwinian concepts in biology, but we need to infuse them in cybersecurity tech as well. As cybersecurity threats have started to evolve, so have the solutions have started to evolve from different companies. Mr. Doss, let me come to you. Cybersecurity as a service, how does it help the business, and what are the advantages that we have over the past?
Sorry, can you go ahead and repeat the question?
Okay, so how will cybersecurity as a service help a business, and what advantages do we have now over the past?
All right, got it. All right, so okay, the past is completely different. So we never had anything as cybersecurity as a service. So when we were working with systems before, we used to host the server within our environment, and all the endpoints would be syncing to that particular server within our own environments. And since now when we are working from home and all the infrastructure has changed, it's going to be a challenge. All the users have to connect to the local environment for the policies to get updated and stuff. But with Sophos, that's we don't even have to worry about that because everything is hosted on the cloud, everything syncs naturally, and we actually don't have to worry about that. So that is one advantage what we have in the cybersecurity as a service. And let's say the cost effective. So as far my memory goes, whatever we have, this amount we spend for the server and the maintenance of that, the upgradation, especially the maintenance cost of the entire thing. And comparing to the service, it's it's a difference there. And then the scalability again. So whenever we have more users, because our company started with less than 10 and it grew 500 plus in a period of 4 years. So that's a thing within our industry, especially. So the scalability was easily taken care of within the Sophos. And then yep. And the support around the clock. We have the MTR product with Sophos. And one thing is we have branches in US, Ukraine, and actually 2 offices in Ukraine. But the support limited to the Bangalore office, or especially within the India. And with this MTR, we don't actually worry about like we have to be awake or we have to assign a person around the clock or a night shift, anything like that. So we have set the policies in such a way if Sophos cannot reach us, they can automatically go ahead and fix the system. So that is again within our policy. So we are again covered in that perspective as well. So I would say these are the key points or the key advantages. But if you look into the Nuken, the smaller item, that is that's the different thing altogether. But these are the major topics or the major advantages which I wanted to present.
Thank you, Mr. Doss. I mean, that's pretty multifaceted. You have jotted down everything in 3 simple perspective or 3 simple principles. Mr. Sridhar, we have spoken about the problems now. What about the solutions? What about the recommendations? What are your recommendations for security? How are you supporting your clients?
So we basically have taken the thumb rule. It's a very simple checklist-based approach because in every organization you have mixed audience. Not everyone is technical. So everyone must be on the same page. The first one is to have a strong connect across the business units or the business practices and across the stakeholders in the entire chain from CEO, CIO to the trainer or the developer at the bottom of the stack. Everyone understands that they have a certain responsibility to play because it's all about organization's reputation, legal implication. There are financial implications in case of there is a security incident, likelihood of a security incident. So everyone must understand that. The second thing what we have done was we have given everyone a chance to 3 simple questions. Do you understand your data? You may be handling or processing sensitive data, confidential data. It can be a personal data. You have coming under certain compliances. Every compliance will attack you in different corners based on which business engagement you are associated. Do you understand that? Do you understand the risks associated with the data if you accidentally come up and share with someone? Do you understand how to act on safeguarding your data? Do you understand your day-to-day obligations, right? So the one thing is we first has make sure that awareness was critical for everyone. And everyone, we have made them mandatory. We have given them a university. We have established internally. We have given them an external training and certifications. So now employees are now understand how they need to act depending upon the type of the data or the business which they are handling currently. Second thing, from an endpoint protection, we have a very reliable platform, as I said earlier, right? So as part of our cyber resilience ecosystem, all our endpoints have now been safeguarded. We do mandatory policy reviews. Our threat intelligence feeds and all have been associated with our technology platforms. Our security operations, we have a dedicated team. We have grown almost like 3 folds now from our security team across the regions. Now, why I'm saying this is because of the span of the global presence that we have from our business. Yes, its own affiliates, its sister concern companies, its partners, its own customers across government, federal. There is so much of data that's around. So all critical services are on cloud, and most of the federal services are on government cloud. So what we have done was, but end of the day, it's a mobile device or the laptop, the EUC devices by which the user is going to connect. So endpoint protection we have enabled. We have enabled the DNS layer protection. So network and endpoints are strictly covered now. We have trained the users on how to act. The biggest point was identity and access governance. Is the right user, who is accessing, what are his obligations, what are his roles and responsibilities. So those have been mandatorily reviewed. We have enabled multi-factor authentication across all our employees worldwide. The other thing we have enabled was multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication for VPN connectivity, multi-factor authentication on their devices. The BitLocker has been enabled on the laptops. It's mandatory. Everything is centrally controlled. And EDR, anyhow, we have, in case we suspect something, our Sophos EDR has a good plan to play where we can isolate the device from anywhere in the globe today. Anywhere we can isolate any suspicious behavior we come up. We have a very good alerting system in place, and we have integrated strongly with our centralized consoles, and it will automatically, we have policies to isolate in case of any suspicious behavior. So later on we can do a root cause analysis, come up and say whether we need to, okay, it's good to go, or we need to maybe do something, act on that specific suspicious behavior. So overall, from a people perspective, we have trained our employees. We have make sure that they understand. From technology perspective, we have the next generation technology platforms in place. Sophos, other DNS layer security, then you have the next gen firewalls, everything is hardened. Every system in the infrastructure is hardened. Critical services are always on cloud for availability and other resilience perspective. From compliance related point of view, data is always encrypted. Rest assured, no mercy policy is something that we adopted in the organization. That's the first security policy which I defined in the organization, no mercy policy. Don't play with it, you are under surveillance. So we tell our users, don't even try to go to social media frenzy and all with your corporate devices. You are under surveillance, we'll caught you, then you know what next. Okay, if you want to enjoy your time, you do it outside the corporate devices. No corporate devices for social media and all that. And because it's, everyone works from home, right? So they keep doing XYZ stuff, accidentally they may come up with something and all. We just want to know. So all our endpoints, everything got blocked on that side of it. So sometimes you get very serious reactions coming from employees. Why we can't do this? No YouTube, no thing. I said, no, you are here for to do business jobs. Your obligations for 8 hours or 9 hours is to do your day-to-day work, not for social media frenzy, Facebooks and all that. So like that, what we have done was, from a technology stack, we have upgraded, did some serious transformations. We have separate labs, or we have isolated IoT labs. We have isolated labs for our center of excellence. Everything is isolated outside of our trusted domain. So micro segmentation has done on our networks. So again, what we are trying to tell or recommend every or other organization based on our capacity and what we have learned so far is, you need to have a knowledge management repository, and this is a mandatory one. Always have a knowledge management system which is good for learning to the employees who come in and the guys who transform and move to the next levels. Mandatory training for all your employees. Without they know, understand how much of technology you put it, there will always be that they start playing around with something. Elevated access. And this is something everyone is friend of. Why do I need to have an elevated access for everything that I need to have? Right? You don't need. And especially if you are on a remote workforce, give a VPN connection, have a VDA infrastructure within that so that they can have more controls from a data security perspective. And emails, we have absolutely enabled MFA on our emails. Only if you have a managed device, you can download. Otherwise, there is no personal devices we are not allowing since this pandemic has started. Earlier, it was only applicable for certain leadership, but since the pandemic, we have given our own corporate devices, duly hardened, and we are managing it to our centralized systems. So managed devices are the only ones where you can download and keep information, but you cannot copy it anywhere. No personal email ID access. So it's like, so we have put up so much of checkpoints that but we are not 100% depending on that, because we continue to assess, review, and optimize our policies and all. But the current state is good enough to protect from any security threat. So multi-layer security strategy is something that we adopted. And it's all about falling back on the basics.
Holistic explanation. There are problem solutions, and you have offered. Correct. Thank you, Mr. Sridhar, and thank you, Mr. Doss, for carving out your time to share some valuable insights. We had experts like you to dwell upon these multifaceted aspects of cybersecurity. As you have all learned that cybersecurity threats are beginning to evolve in significant ways, with hackers finding more creative and unique ways to enter a network, and the endpoints are their ultimate target. These advanced threats require a modern, substantial security solution, and endpoint security fills that vulnerability gap. EDR, we have EDR to help your businesses keep safe. Now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this webinar. If you have questions after the webinar, feel free to reach out to us. You can mail us your query and questions at mediarelease@smeventure.com, as well as editor@smeventure.com. From here, though, this concludes our panel discussion. I personally had a great day discussing a lot of good things related to cybersecurity with all our experts here. Thank you, Mr. Sridhar. Thank you, Mr. Doss, and thank you, Malay, as well, for for giving your time and giving out some such valuable insights. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you again for presenting this. We really appreciate your effort and your expertise. Like cybersecurity, we're facing a multi-point attacks. We also have the viruses, so please ensure to wear your mask, to wash your hands, and to keep social distancing. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you. Bye.